Hello, my name is Lauren and welcome to the Theoretical YouTube channel, where today we are embarking on our most ambitious journey yet. Yes, little did you know when you clicked on this video you were actually starting an 8-part series about Lilo and Stitch. And before you try to leave, I've locked the doors so you can't escape. I'm sorry, I just don't make the rules here. Anyway, what the heck am I talking about? Why, Lilo and Stitch, of course! I'm always talking about Lilo and Stitch. It is one of my favorite animated movies of all time. And not only do I love this movie, but I grew up with the whole franchise. The sequel that was the first movie to ever make me cry, the sequel I actually just watched for the first time researching this video, and the one I would obsessively rewatch as a kid. And the TV show that connected them all, except for Stitch Has a Glitch, which honestly doesn't fit super well into an otherwise cohesive story. But if you didn't have a decent childhood and somehow missed the Lilo and Stitch TV show, you missed a ton of lore. Like maybe the most lore ever packed into an animated franchise, but do not quote me on that, because the progression from Lilo and Stitch to Leroy and Stitch is insane in terms of how much you'd miss out if you skipped everything in the middle. Like, you know how Stitch's Experiment 626?
I call it Experiment 626.
The show tries to cover the other 625-ish other genetic experiments.
625 experiment pods activated by water raining down on one of the wettest spots on Earth?
Actually, is only 623.
Whatever!
Which is what we're going to start to cover today. We are going to be tackling the question that just begs to be answered after watching 29 plus hours of English Lilo and Stitch content. Which one of Jumba's genetic experiments is the most dangerous? I am so excited. Okay, so if it's been a while since you've even thought about Lilo and Stitch, here is the basic setup as to why we are even asking this question. Dr. Jumba Jookiba was an evil scientist who specialized in genetic experiments that he planned on using to destroy and conquer worlds.
But that would be irresponsible and unethical. I would never, ever make more than one.
Stitch is his 626th experiment, which is the one that finally gets discovered and confiscated by the Galactic Armada when they arrest him for the space equivalent of violating the Geneva Conventions. Stitch is an ideal model for Jumba's plans. He's pretty much the most destructive creature ever created and spends the majority of the first movie trying to destroy cities. But there are 625-ish other experiments or prototypes that Jumba was working on before he finally landed on Stitch's perfect design. And it is very similar to Pokemon in the sense that each experiment has its own individual power set and that they need to be captured in the narrative of the show. But instead of being forced to fight to the death, Jumba's experiments are rehabilitated by Lilo and relocated to the one place they truly belong, once they're no longer evil and trying to destroy the world. So, what we are trying to do with this series is determine which one of Jumba's experiments is actually the most dangerous. Which one would do the most damage if it was actually released into the world, still evil and not given a minimum wage job. And that would be a very long video. So for one thing, we are only going to consider experiments that appeared in a show or a movie and that we know the function of. We'll be judging how dangerous every experiment is by how powerful they appeared on screen. We've also broken up this video series into chunks that correlate with the series number of each experiment batch. For instance, Stitch is experiment number 626, meaning that he is part of the series 6 experiment batch. This will come in handy because the power escalation that happens as Jumba gets to his final creations is not insignificant. And today we are kicking things off by starting with the lightweights of the franchise, Series 0. Series 0 is often considered to be like a test batch or experiments that were designed to help with common household chores. But there are a few deadly gems hiding in the otherwise seemingly harmless rubble, so let us finally get started. And what better place to start than with the very first genetic experiment, number 001, aka Shrink. Of course, Shrink doesn't actually appear on screen, so we are somehow already breaking our own rules, but Shrink is in a newspaper article that appears in Leroy and Stitch. The article has a picture of Jumba and Hamsterville, who were still working together as partners at the time, and depicts Shrink, who is able to shrink things. And people. Like Jumba. However, Shrink isn't likely to rank very high in this competition for a couple of reasons. The first being that his shrinkage just isn't that powerful. Earlier on in the franchise, we already know and see that Jumba has a shrinking ray that is significantly better at shrinking things down to a microscopic level. But Shrink also ranks low because we know for certain that his effects are either temporary or reversible, because obviously Jumba doesn't stay small. Sorry, Shrink, but you do get a gold star for going first. Next up was Experiment 002, or Double Dip, who was designed to lick things twice. How evil. But not very powerful. Next, 007 is Yapper, who eventually becomes Myrtle's dog, Gigi. Gigi has a near-human intelligence, speaks fluent English, and is able to make Myrtle a better person.
Nice one, cousin! You can talk?
But is otherwise a completely normal dog. Absolutely one of the most memorable experiments, but just not very dangerous in the grand scheme of things. Number 010 is Felix, who I think might also be referred to as Oscar at one point, but there are lots of things that you should not quote me on. Felix's purpose is to dispose of things he determines are dirty or general waste, which might not sound very intense, but the fact that he cleans things by shooting fireballs at them is... However, this is going to start the long trend of Lilo and Stitch ignoring how actual fire and plasma work. So even though Felix is shooting what are supposed to be extremely destructive blasts, his fireballs don't actually do that much damage, and is therefore getting a pretty low ranking. Number 014 is Colonel, who was designed to pop popcorn, and honestly I'm not really sure what Jumbo was planning on doing with this guy on a battlefield. Number 020 is Slick, who is described as being able to sell anything to anyone. He's basically the world's best salesman and an overall sleazy con man, which could be seen as dangerous in some cases. Like he could sell crystal meth to a 10-year-old. In fact, this experiment could be seen at his most dangerous in any system of power that relies on moving money, like a high-stakes drug ring. This got dark very quickly. Anyway, we are trying to eliminate the amount of context needed to concoct the maximum amount of damage any of these experiments could do if they were released. So maybe Slick would be a powerful malicious drug lord, or he'd be a carny ripping people off at a ring toss. Who's to say? But he's a solid maybe in my book. Experiment 024 is Hamlet, who is able to turn things into ham. But again, context matters here. Like, there would be a big problem if you turned the president into ham, but if you turned a cactus into ham, it'd be delicious. What I'm trying to say is that if you have to rely on a ridiculous amount of context to even make an experiment effective, then it's probably not as dangerous as some of the others. So Hamlet is probably not the world's biggest concern. Number 025 is Topper, who is a dim beacon of light that gets used as a Christmas tree topper, and I swear there are dangerous experiments. Like Experiment 029, aka Checkers, who is finally getting a high-ranking status from Series 0. That took a while. Checkers has the ability to give whoever wears him as a crown the power of command over every living being. Which, yeah, you don't really need to stretch the context that much to see how this might be a little problematic. So it's not impossible to overpower them, but it is very difficult and requires planning. But even in the TV show, we do see a couple transfer of powers as Checkers gets passed around between a couple different characters. He is very dangerous, but luckily doesn't have that much agency of his own, making him a very high-ranking, dangerous experiment in this episode, but who knows if he'll make it to the final round. I mean, I know, but that's because this is my video. You guys have to wait to find out. Number 031 is Gotcha, who's designed to pinch people, but not even that hard. Number 032 is Fibber, who is a living lie detector and can fly, which are pretty cool powers, but not necessarily that dangerous unless all of your relationships rely on you lying to the people that you love. Shame on you. Number 033 is Hammerface, who's designed to hit things with blunt force, but with basically the same impact as a hammer on a nail, which would hurt, but isn't that much more dangerous than a normal person with a hammer. Number 036 is Pokey, who pokes holes in containers containing liquids. Don't let him near toxic waste, but otherwise just a little annoying. Number 040 is Backhoe, who digs holes. Number 044 is Forehead, who is my favorite experiment because he is literally 4 heads in a barbershop quartet that sing off key.
We're evil 'cause we sing annoyingly off key.
Extremely evil, but not super dangerous. And then we get our next real contender with Experiment 051, aka Hawker, who spits acid. The acid shown in the TV show is capable of dissolving about an inch or two of wood in a few seconds, as shown when he spits on Mrs. Hasagawa's house. But what exactly is acid, and how does it work, and how dangerous is it? Acids are substances with a pH balance of lower than 7. They also have a bunch of positively charged hydrogen ions, aka a single proton. When acids come in contact with other substances, they release those hydrogen ions that want to bond with an electron. They do this by stealing them. This is a highly destructive process that results in a bunch of hydrogen gas and goo that used to be a wall. There are different types of acid based on how completely they dissolve into positively charged hydrogen ions. If the acid does completely dissolve, it can be classified as a strong acid, whereas acids that don't completely dissolve are weak acids. Since Hawker's spit completely dissolves the wood, I think that means it's a strong acid. Please fact check me. Taking a look at this pH chart and knowing that Hawker spit is far more destructive than lemon juice or even stomach acid, my guess is that Hawker spit is actually a 0 on the pH scale, meaning that it's on the same level, or it could be, as industrial acids like hydrochloric acid, which would make it deadly to ingest, or, given how fast it works, even touch. And if we're looking at some of the most dangerous man-made acids on the planet, Hawker spit might be akin to peroxymonosulfuric acid, or Caro's acid, which is known to completely oxidize organic matter like wood. Therefore, Hawker scares me a whole lot, and I would not pick a fight. Moving on, there's Experiment 062, who is able to make food with empty calories. Like the witch in Hansel and Gretel, his goal is to fatten people up with delicious food and then eat them, which is terrifying, but you can also just start dieting. And Lilo convinces him to make healthy food anyway, so crisis averted. Number 077 is Zop, who snores loudly. Annoying, but maybe not life-threatening. Number 086 is Clink, who can capture other experiments and hold them in his body, which functions as a containment unit, which really only works on other experiments, and he can only hold one at a time, so it's really not a world-ending power. And the final experiment that we know about from Series 0 is 089, aka Skip, who is able to remove a victim from time itself for 10 years. What happens is that your consciousness stays the same despite the time jump, and you've just been missing from everyone's lives for 10 years. So the world has vastly changed in the time that you have gone, assuming that you played a significant role in the timeline. For instance, when Lilo disappears for 10-year chunks, the world gets progressively worse and more like a dictatorship under Hamsterville's rule, because she played an active role in stopping his fight for total domination. But what if I skip 10 years? I'm not cavorting with aliens to save Earth, I'm just talking about it online. Sure, you'd miss my YouTube videos, obviously, but Skip's impact on the timeline is entirely dependent on who he chooses to send into the future. Meaning that he could potentially be extremely powerful and dangerous, but it all relies on context. Anytime the argument devolves into, but what if this experiment targeted the president, I am inclined to take off a few points. The truth is that Skip is a very cool experiment, but not necessarily dangerous on his own merit, and therefore does not advance to the next stage. Also, he can reset everything on the timeline to before the time skip, so it's kind of a null point anyway. Which leaves us with a decision between Checkers and Hawker. Who is the most dangerous Series 0 experiment? And here's where I want to introduce a final stipulation in the way that we are determining how dangerous these experiments really are. Because mind control and spitting acid are completely different power sets with very little overlap in terms of data that we can compare. So instead of imagining the damage each of these experiments could do if they were released into our world on their own, let's imagine what they could do if they were being used as targeted weapons, which was Jumba's original intent anyway.
To destroy everything he touches!
So if he finally escaped from prison and captured one of these experiments, which one would be the most dangerous in Dr. Hamsterville's hands? And, at least in Series 0, I think that total social domination beats out raw destruction. Meaning that the winner for this round of a new 8-part series of Lilo and Stitch content, and moving on to the final round of consideration, the most dangerous Series 1 experiment is number 029, aka Checkers. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you haven't seen the Lilo and Stitch TV series, I highly recommend it. If you like this video format and want to see more, please stay tuned because we have plenty more of this series planned. You can also physically like this video and subscribe to the channel for more content about Disney and other very nerdy things. You can follow us on Twitter at Theory_Central in order to unlock the ability to sing off-key in a barbershop quartet, and support us on Patreon like the incredible David W., who is helping us produce more theories and videos. But that is all of our notes from Series 0. So thanks for watching, Miga Nana Krista, and we'll see you later.
Who knew carpool vans had such sophisticated weapon systems?